Good afternoon and good evening. We're kind of in that middle space. I was hoping that we would have some more students showing up. I saw several earlier. Dr. J, I'm coming. But I know that students will normally trail in. I figure with the opening comments and the formal introduction of our speaker, by that time, hopefully we'll have some students who have gathered as well. So, welcome and thank you for coming to the closing Cultural Awareness Series event for the year. I have been thoroughly pleased and excited about the series, bringing it here to Chestnut Hill College, and for all of you and others who have been staunch supporters and who have come out to the speakers, the various cultural events that we have had. It has been greatly appreciated. I hope that the series also has been helpful to you in terms of awareness, celebration of all cultures, and including even gender, as we look at what we're doing for the year. So, thank you. Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Officially, they have the longest name. And so it is traditionally celebrated during the month of May. But because we are only in school for 1 week, I've always thought that, we don't want to shortchange anyone. And since we don't have any other heritage months in April, it's just easy to move it up. At some institutions, they actually celebrate it in September when they come back to school. And so here I made the decision that we would honor it and celebrate it during April. And the reason that the month of May was chosen, because that was the first time that there is on record, of course, a presence of Asians here in the United States. It was with the Japanese in 1843, and they came in the month of May. And so that is the reason why the month was picked. Also, the difference, I guess, in the month as well has been the introduction of the title Pacific. When this month was first designated, it was just Asian American Heritage Month. And then, of course, there's been a lot of research and also cultural implications around what it means to be a Pacific Islander, and how, while they're still Asian, their experience culturally has been different. And so there was a movement just in the last 7 or 8 years to add Pacific into the month. And so that's why we have Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So anyway, that might be more than you wanted to know, but I always think it's good for people to understand why cultural months exist, how they came about, how they got their names. Our speaker tonight, or this evening, he has this wonderful, long, lovely bio that I'm going to try to get through most of. But I will say this: I have been absolutely enamored by this man and his background and perseverance against probably many odds. And in our conversations over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I felt like he's like my new friend. And so I appreciate him for this. So before us, Kenneth Wong. The multidimensional Kenneth Wong represents the promise as well as the reality of one of America's founding principles as he opens new avenues for business opportunity and active civic engagement. Mr. Wong is a principal in NAVPEC Advisors, LLC, that brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to both the U.S. and China markets. NAVPEC Advisors, under leadership of Mr. Wong, assists U.S. entities navigating through the complexities of developing strategies and building working relationships in China. In a very short period of time, entities in China realized that NAVPEC Advisors should do the same for them in the U.S. market. Today, NAVPEC Advisors successfully navigates entities across the Pacific, utilizing their many skills and established relationships to achieve their clients' goals and objectives. For over 30 years, Mr. Wong can be credited by combining his business acumen, cross-cultural facility, and focused management tactics to establish CIG Asia Limited, a successful Philadelphia-based national property and casualty insurance brokerage firm. Under his direction as president, the company provides its diverse client base with the coverage and advice required to weather the vagaries of a complex business environment. Okay, this is the problem. I'm partly in the shadows. Yeah, No, because it's really good. He's done so much. I want you guys to hear this stuff. So, in 2009, Mr. Wong, with the assistance of some Wall Street colleagues, founded Covenant Group of China, a US-based publicly traded holding company that is partnering with China-based SMEs and are successfully operating in the booming China domestic economy. Mr. Wong served as the president of Covenant Group of China. In addition to the knowledge of China domestic market trends, Mr. Wong has a very strong working relationship with the People's Republic of China government, both in the US and in China. Mr. Wong's commitment to full inclusion of Asian Americans and New Americans living, working, and doing business in the United States in general, and the Delaware Valley in particular, has landed him in numerous leadership positions. This is the good stuff, y'all. As an example, Mr. Wong, from 2004 to 2007, was appointed by President George W. Bush to serve as the commissioner on the President's Advisory Commission for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, where he focused on economic strategies and community development. Through Mr. Wong's efforts, both in Washington, D.C. and across the nation, many doors of opportunity have been opened for Asian American economic development for large and small businesses. At the 2008 National U.S. Hong Kong Business Association, or NUSHCBA, how do they say it? The acronym. They don't? Okay. It's going to be NUSHCBA today. How about that? So that way I don't have to say that long thing again. Mr. Wong was elected unanimously to the national presidency of this organization. In 2010, Mr. Wong has taken on the responsibilities as the chairman of the board for NUSHCBA, and it represents 16 U.S.-based Hong Kong business associations and focuses on the development of economic trade relationships with Hong Kong and China. NUSHCBA is a member of the Hong Kong Business Association Worldwide, which is affiliated with the prestigious Hong Kong Trade and Development Council. In addition to Mr. Wong's national leadership position, he is also the member of the executive board of Hong Kong Business Association Worldwide Federation. Locally, his civic participation includes service on the boards of the American Red Cross for Eastern Pennsylvania and serving as the chair of the Services of the Armed Forces Committee, Liberty USO, Pennsylvania and Southern New Jersey, the Philadelphia Sports Congress, the Multicultural Affairs Conference, the Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network, y'all tired yet? He's not. Philadelphia Hospitality, the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau, Board of Managers of the Central High School of Philadelphia, Chow is one of our graduates from there, American Heritage Federal Credit Union, Wills Eye Hospital Glaucoma Service Foundation, and member of the American Legion Benjamin Franklin Post 405. I'm still not done. In May of 2012, Governor Tom Corbett of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania appointed Mr. Wong to the chairmanship of his Advisory Commission for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Mr. Wong's agenda includes both economic and leadership development for the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. As part of a national effort to assist in building the United States Army, Mr. Wong serves as the chairman of the U.S. Army Philadelphia Community Advisory Board, made up of area, community, and business leaders. The board's mission is to help promote the benefits the Army offers through college education, job training, leadership development, and a military career. The success of the Philadelphia Advisory Board has Mr. Wong engaged in the formation of similar advisory boards across the United States. On April 19, 2017, Mr. Wong was appointed by Acting Secretary of the Army, Mr. Robert Speer, as a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. In this role, Mr. Wong is a liaison between the Office of the Secretary of the Army and the citizens of the United States. Mr. Wong is a member of the Union League of Philadelphia and participates on the Armed Services Council. Mr. Wong lives here in Philadelphia and is the father of 2 lovely daughters. That was a mouthful, but now you see why I wanted to read it. His background and experience is impeccable, and I think that there is no better person to come and grace our very first Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So thank you, and Ken, if you'll come and bless our mic, we'd appreciate it.
I'm gonna have to tell you, that's the first time I've heard anybody read my CV. I don't even read my CV. So thank you for having me here at Chestnut Hill College. It's actually a real treat for me because I've passed the campus many times, and I always drive by and say, that's a really cool looking building. I wonder what's inside there. I wonder what's going on inside there, but never had the pleasure, and thank you for the invitation. When we talked about, what you want me to speak about this evening, you kind of just left me hanging there with whatever you want to talk about. In my bio that was read, I do a lot of things overseas, in China and Hong Kong. And just as full disclaimer, I don't speak Chinese. As a kid growing up in Oxford Circle in Northeast Philadelphia, my parents would always drag me to Chinatown for Chinese lessons on a Sunday afternoon for 2.5 hours. Now, those are back in the days where they thought just because you could speak Chinese, you must be able to teach Chinese, and that they never recognized teaching as a real skill. So I probably had somebody that could speak Chinese, could read Chinese, but couldn't teach a lick. And I spent more time in those Chinese lessons trying to figure out how to get out. So over the years, I got kicked out of all 3 Chinese schools that existed in Philadelphia. And my father finally realized, with a lot of great frustration, that it just wasn't worth it anymore, because he was becoming the talk of the community as having this son, his oldest son, not being a very good Chinese student. So he kind of gave up on me after a while. So I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia at a time when there weren't very many Asian Americans, or even Pacific Islanders, let alone in Philadelphia. So I grew up in a neighborhood where we were the only Asian Americans living in an area. So I grew up in an Irish Catholic community. There you go, in your neighborhood. So you know what I'm talking about. So as the oldest of 4 kids, I was always the one that would get into a fight with somebody. And being in an Irish Catholic neighborhood, that guy always had like 6 or 7 brothers. And it was not a sustainable strategy to have to fight all 6 or 7 brothers. So, I had to figure out another way of just existing amongst everybody else and sort of trying to get along where I could be seen as an equal. I went to a local grade school and did very well in school. But unfortunately, being out on the streets with really good grades didn't always help with some of the kids that I grew up with. But I did make a conscious decision, instead of going to my neighborhood high school, was going to Central High School of Philadelphia, which was probably one of the best things I ever did. At that time, there were only 6 Asian American students at that entire school. Chow, what percentage of the student population at Central were Asian Americans when you went there? Right, and now it's up to about 33%. Boy, I would have loved that. I would have loved having other Asian American kids there. And then once I graduated from high school, I had an opportunity to go to the Naval Academy, but I couldn't pass the eye exam. So I ended up going to Penn State, and I was a decent student, but I wasn't a great student. I was actually a better athlete. So I was the only Asian American playing Division I sports in the United States at that time up at Penn State. So I played soccer for a year. Then after I was injured and they repaired my knee, I was on the fencing team, because at the time I fenced in high school and was fortunate enough to win a state title. So after I was medically declined to play soccer any longer in college, the fencing coach approached me about fencing, and being a young guy and sort of thinking that, wow, this is a great opportunity. So I said to the fencing coach, I said, sir, I would love to fence, but the soccer team just told me that I couldn't play soccer any longer. And he was an old coach. was an Olympic coach, coached a lot of U.S. national champions, and he kind of looked at me and he said, "Well, Mr. Wong, I'm not asking you to play soccer, I'm asking you to fence." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." So I ended up fencing, the rest of the years I was at Penn State, and, moving on from that. And, it's funny, as an Asian American, playing sports, that was the least of my parents' concerns. I played 3 varsity sports in high school. I played collegiate sports, and my parents never, ever saw me play 1 second of any of the sports I played in, because it wasn't important to them. It was about getting my education and what am I going to do as an adult. I'm trying to explain to Mom, there's people making millions of dollars playing sports, and she would say, "You're too little for that. You're too little for that." But I'm fortunate. I'm really blessed. In a life where I've had a lot of great opportunities, and those opportunities didn't occur just by themselves. I had great friends and great mentors. My parents were very lucky that they had a small business, and they had customers. They had a laundry, and they had some customers that sort of befriended them and looked after them. They would see the kids running around in the laundry when they would come in, and they would ask about us. They would ask about how we're doing in school, so forth and so on. So since my parents really didn't speak English that much at home, or speak English very well, it made it difficult for us in our early years to speak English, because all we heard was Chinese. So we were fortunate to have a customer who was, her and her husband were actually missionaries in China for many years. She was an educator, and he was a college professor of chemistry. So Mrs. Howe used to come on Saturdays, and she always picked the nicest days. She would come on Saturdays, and I have to stay inside, and she would tutor me in math and in English. But again, if it wasn't for the kindness of a lot of folks, I wouldn't have really had the opportunity to even understand, what I wanted and how I wanted to do certain things. I tell people I'm probably one of the luckiest persons in the world, and that, my parents immigrated to the United States and had a very small, Chinese laundry in Northeast Philadelphia. And then somehow I end up getting a wonderful education, and I find myself advising the President of the United States about things. A little bit scary sometimes when he looks at you and says, "Well, what do you think?" And you kind of know that, I better give him a good answer. One time when we were rolling out some new tax reforms, so imagine an auditorium with about 400 reporters in an audience, and we're up on a stage, and we're in this round table, and we were talking about tort reform. And so we're sitting around a table, the President of the United States, some law professors from Yale and Harvard, and myself, and we're talking about tort reform, and it's kind of getting interesting, for as interesting as it can get. And all of a sudden, we're like in mid-sentence, and President Bush raises his hand and says, "Can I ask a question?" And all of us just stopped in just midstream. We kind of just looked at each other, and we all sat back very slowly. And he realized how awkward it made us feel. So his comment was, "Well, yeah, I am the President of the United States. Of course I can ask a question." And all that went through my mind is, oh my gosh, I hope he doesn't ask me the question, because I may not have an answer. But it was something pretty silly. But we talk about, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about in regards to Asian Americans and what they've done in the United States. And there's a lot of great historical facts. Some of it's good history, some of it's not so good history. But it is history, and it happened. But I don't really think that's where, at least I want to focus on things. My focus really is on where we're going as Asian Americans. I've I think I'm past my run of things, and it's really young folks like Chow and where they're going here in the United States, the impact they're going to make in the United States. We're a much smaller ethnic minority group than a lot of other minorities, so we don't have the critical mass. I think in the United States, we only make up somewhere around 6% of the American population. So it's 17 million people out of almost 400 million people. So how we handle ourselves and what we do, it's a different type of strategy. It's a much different type of strategy. Asian Americans have done quite well for themselves in the United States at this point in time, in regards to the percentage of folks that have undergraduate degrees, the percentage of folks that have graduate degrees much higher than other groups in the United States. The average median income is higher. But a lot of success we have is based on our culture. It's based on the belief of education and the family unit. But also, sometimes that culture sort of inhibits us too. We were taking testimony down at the NIH when I was at the White House, and we had an executive from AT&T attend, and he was giving testimony, and we're asking them about how do Asian Americans, how are they doing with AT&T? And he said, oh, they're very good, hard workers, very loyal. And I said, well, what percentage of your employees are in management? And he gave me a percentage, and I said, how many are in upper management? And he said, not very many, sir. And that kind of disturbed me a little, and I thought, well, I'm going to get on this guy's back now. And I said, well, why do you think not very many Asian Americans want to be in upper management? And he said, well, we don't get very many Asian Americans that want to apply for upper management. But he couldn't give me an answer as to why. And sometimes in our culture, we're taught that we're part of a total sum, but sometimes it's not polite to make yourself stand out and put yourself above others. I guess I have a difference of opinion in regards to, I believe that a lot of things that can happen in society and is about good leadership. So I think you can be a good leader without assuming the role of being above everybody. And I think there's a difference between the two. So in our community, we're really trying to work at developing a lot of good leadership. When I was at the White House, and then when I was chairman of the Governor's Commission, two of my main objectives were economic development and leadership development, because I think the two go hand in hand in regards to how we can become, even more integrated in the fabric of this country, and that's really what we're striving for. But just a quick summary in regards to here, just in the area. So the Chinese started arriving in the United States back in the 1840s, and sometimes you'll hear the term Gamsan, and Gamsan means mountain of gold. So that was during the gold rush. So a lot of Chinese were immigrating into the United States during that time. The first Chinese business was established in 1871, right in Chinatown, and it was a laundry. And I think that the building is still there. The laundry's gone, but there's a marker that designates the location there. And back then in the 60s, it was just a few restaurants and a grocery store. My senior thesis was actually ethnic identity awareness of Chinese Americans and its economic impact on the Philadelphia economy. So my thesis was about the fact that with President Nixon opening up China, that the immigration would start of Chinese, and it would last a long time. But a Chinatown, unlike a lot of other ethnic communities that sort of disseminated, and kind of melted into the rest of the society, I had predicted that the Chinese community would continue to grow and with very definitive boundaries, because Chinatown would continue to be a transitioning platform for a lot of Chinese, because of language, because of employment, so forth and so on. And at that time, When I wrote my paper, I think there was maybe 8 Chinese restaurants and 2 grocery stores. Today, there's a few more than that. And Philadelphia actually experiences currently 3 separate Chinese communities in Philadelphia. The traditional Chinatown, South Philadelphia on Washington Avenue, and then up in Northeast Philadelphia between Route 1, Roosevelt Boulevard, and Cottman Avenue. There's another Chinese community there, and I think it's pretty substantial because Solace Cohen Elementary School, which is the local elementary school there, 1/3 of their student population is Chinese. So there's got to be a good number of families there with, just within that neighborhood. So we are the fastest growing, Asian Americans are the fastest growing population in Pennsylvania, let alone the United States. So it's grown by as much as 45% in the last 10 years. It's pretty quick. More importantly, voter turnout has increased by 35%. So a lot of the Chinese are starting to recognize, or Asian Americans are starting to recognize the value and the importance of voting. So as I said before, there's 17 million Asian Americans in the United States and continues to grow. I'm just going to share some interesting, I call them fun facts, with you, that 28% of U.S. goods and 27% of services that are exported from the United States go to Asia. It's 32% of U.S. jobs come from goods and services that are exported to Asia. There's a 100% increase in the United States in direct foreign investment from Asia. 64% of international students in the United States come from Asia. Now this is what's really interesting. And those students contribute $14 billion to the US economy. So in Pennsylvania alone, it's $700 million a year that comes from, that's an economic impact of Asian students that come to Pennsylvania for college. I knew it was pretty high, but I didn't realize it was that high. 16% of Americans that study abroad go to Asia. Is there a study abroad program in Asia here? There you go. We'll talk about that. We might be able to help that even more with some of the connections we can give you. 8.5 million visitors from Asia come to the United States and contribute $41 billion to our U.S. economy. So as you had indicated, that I sit on the board of directors of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. So China has just passed England or Great Britain having the largest number of foreign tourists that come to Philadelphia. So the average foreign tourist from Europe spends about roughly $2,000 when they come to Philadelphia. The average amount of money spent by a tourist coming from China is close to $10,000. So currently, I'm working with the Philadelphia airport in trying to get an airlines from China to make a direct flight to Philadelphia. We're the only major city in the United States without a direct flight to Asia. So I figured just if it's 10,000 more tourists from China a year, which is not a whole lot, do the math, times 10,000, it's $100 million, local impact on the economy. So, for as much as we hear right now about things between the United States and China, with trade, the trade war, well, not really trade war. My personal opinion is that it's all saber rattling in the media. I know right now there's some very, very productive discussions in regards to how to work the trade deficit down, and it's being actively pursued by both countries. So the United States and China, they realize they need each other for a lot of different reasons. They need each other in regards to, trying to establish peace, on a global basis. The United States, for as for as much as we are deployed throughout the world, we can't be everywhere. And, the diplomacy is much more than military diplomacy, but it's economic diplomacy. And having a good relationship with China so that they can maintain peace in the Pacific Rim is very important. Because both countries need each other, for a lot of reasons. I couldn't imagine living at home without a lot of the electronics and goods and things that I have that are made, in Asia. And the Chinese couldn't imagine not having somebody to sell all these things to. When we look at an industry that is impacted by some type of economic downturn, and we talk about 20, 30,000 people, being impacted as far as jobs are concerned. Because of the size of China, they're looking at 1 million people being impacted, 1 million people losing their jobs. So we need each other. We absolutely need each other. And so there's a lot of things being done in that respect. I figured I had to touch on something about what's going on economically between the two countries, since it's taken up a lot of space in the newsprint. But unfortunately, I don't know how much to believe of that sometimes, because it gets a little bit embellished. I've been in meetings in Washington, and the next day I'll pick up the newspaper to read a story about the meeting that I was in. And I sit and I'll read the story 2 or 3 times and try to understand where the reporter was during this time period, because they weren't in the same meeting I was in. But just sharing a little bit about my story. I do a lot of things. I'm fortunate in that as a kid growing up, I saw how hard my parents worked. And frankly, I didn't want to work that hard. And so one of the things I did was I grew businesses, and I was really fortunate to find, really good folks to work for me. And over the years, realizing that, you need that loyalty, you need people who feel as if, they own a piece of the business. So I made a conscious decision to take percentages of all my companies and give them to my employees. So my employees actually do now own a piece of all the companies that I have, and it allows me to do all the things that I really want to do. I'm involved in a lot of organizations because when I ask about the participation of Asian Americans in these different organizations, I used to get this response: well, we didn't know where to go to find Asian Americans to participate. And I would look at them and I'd say, are you kidding me? We're everywhere. So I do a lot of these things because I feel an obligation to connect our communities, to make sure that services that some of these organizations provide to communities, that those same services are also available to the Asian American community. I do a lot with the military, specifically with the Army, because of the opportunities that the Army offers to young people through education, through training, through just job experience. I get the pleasure of giving away college scholarships to students every year, to the tune of about $1 million a year. So I love giving away other people's money, especially if I know that it's going to make an impact on somebody's life, and hopefully that same person will, as we call it, a force multiplier, will get that education and do some good things and pay it forward. So, what I do, I look at it as just a small piece of what I can do to try to help the community. I think if you're good at anything that you do, you can make a good living and you can provide for yourself. But I don't think that making a lot of money always, it makes you the happiest person in the world. I always tell people that I do a lot of these things for personal, selfish reasons. And I'll ask the audience, when you do something nice for somebody, does that make you feel good? And most of the time, people raise their hands. And I said, well, I'm really interested about making myself feel good all the time. So I you know, I'm lucky that I can spend as much time as I can. I don't expect other people to do that, but we try to lead by example and hope that some people will do, you know, even if they can do a little bit always goes a long ways. So that's really my story. You know, it's not as exciting as my CV. I actually have my CV written by somebody that made me sound more exciting. But I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any questions. Great. No questions. It lets me off the hook. Thank you.